Look, the next session is a panel which is convened by Bronwyn Adcock, and I just want to read a little paragraph out of this book that I came across, which Monica gave me, called Beyond the Ashes. Many of you may have read it. It's from Yalladella High School students, and Bronwyn puts a forward into the book, and I just wanted to read this little paragraph that she wrote. She says, "As a writer over the past year, I've continued to interview survivors of the Shoalhaven fire. There will never be enough words to fully convey the horror and magnitude of what some people experienced this past summer." And she's writing it in 2020. "A bushfire is a terrifying event. To lose a home is a profound grief. But I continue to be amazed at the stories I hear of how people have made it through, the smart decisions made in the face of chaos and danger that kept them safe, the resilience and strength that keep going in the aftermath, especially when 2022 continued to deliver such a rough deal." I think that really sums up what resilience is about, particularly after the Shoalhaven fire, when we all chipped in and everyone helped each other. So we are going to run through a panel, and it's going to run like this. Bronwyn is going to convene it and introduce your panellists. This one is community-led resilience. I won't introduce them, I'll let Bronwyn do that. Each speaker will speak for 10 minutes. They'll be given a little reminder at 8 minutes. And it won't be a giant hook or a cane pulling them off the stage. It'll just be a gentle reminder. And then after everyone's finished, we've got a couple of set questions that Bronwyn's going to put to the panel. And we just ask anyone from the panel who'd like to volunteer to answer them. And then people, you may remember when you booked your tickets, people submitted some questions beforehand that they may like to ask. So if we've got time, we'll run through some of those. But then we'll have the rest of the time, which is an hour. The whole thing's an hour, so we'll have about 20 minutes to open it up to the floor, and you guys can ask the panellists questions. And that's the whole idea of having today, is to talk to these people within their communities that have started resilience plans or preparedness plans or whatever words you want to use, and pick their brains, ask them how they did it, what they did, what they found hard, what they found easy, things like that. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Bronwyn.
Thank you, Alistair. Look, we'll dive straight in because we've got 4 presentations and they will all be absolutely fascinating, and we only have 10 minutes each. So the first one we're going to hear from Ian Stevens. Ian is with the Little Forest Road Resilience Plan. Little Forest Road is a rural-based community just north of Milton with about 80 properties. It was really heavily impacted by the Shoalhaven bushfire. The community's just starting down the road of preparing a community-led resilience plan, and Ian Stevens will talk to you about that. Thanks, Brian.
Morning all. Just push that down a bit. How's that? Okay. Just to introduce myself, and my wife and I moved down to God's country, this part of the world, about 5.5 years ago from the horrible Sydney place, and we moved into a bushfire-prone area, and we realised we knew absolutely nothing about bushfires, and one of the first things we did is joined up with the RFS. We gave 5 years to the RFS, including working through the Kingham and Kings Point, and 2.5 months on the Shoalhaven fire, plus lots of smaller incidents. And last year we decided that we wanted to refocus our efforts to be more on community-led resilience rather than as part of the RFS. And I hope that as part of I go through the talk today, you'll see a lot of similarities between what we set out to do
and what Peter Dunn was talking about as the necessities for communities across Australia. So, quick agenda. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of Little Forest's experience in the community, in the Currowan Fire, talk a little bit about our initial community recovery efforts, our consideration of community-led resilience teams, our approach, what we've done since, and our progress to date and the work in progress. And I put there, it's a journey, not a race. Maybe I should have said it's a marathon without an end, as opposed to a 100 metres race. I don't think you'll ever finish. It's an ongoing type of exercise. So this map, sorry if there's no triggering that comes from this, but it is a reality. On the right-hand side of this, this picture, that white line is the Princes Highway, going just north of Milton, and the buff-coloured area is the extent of the Currowan Fire. Little Forest Road goes from the highway out to the west, about 8 kilometres. It's a one road in, one road out community, similar to many of the communities that we have in this area. We had fire in the landscape from probably mid-December through to when the big one hit, which was New Year's Eve 2019, when everything went pear-shaped. Need to acknowledge it didn't just go pear-shaped for us, it went pear-shaped for everywhere from Mogo to north of Nowra. And I acknowledge that the impact of that was extraordinary on so many different communities. In Little Forest, we had about 12 homes were lost, lots of outbuildings, countless kilometres of fencing, lots of stock losses, and I don't even want to think about the wildlife losses. Just seeing at our place the impact on the wildlife was frankly pretty depressing. Our initial community efforts, before the fire even started, we had set up a couple of WhatsApp groups for communication between people who lived in the community. There was one called Little Forest Alerts, and it was exactly what you'd expect. If there was something emergency going on, you'd put a message out on Little Forest Alerts and people would help. So what we had is neighbours helping neighbours. Someone would say that the fire has reached the back of my home property, my home paddock, and neighbours would come to help to assist that neighbour. It was quite an extraordinary reaction. We also had a general WhatsApp group, which all of this continue to this day, and that covered everything from someone's cow's escaped through to a dog's escaped or a goat's escaped, or we just need to talk to each other. But that was a great value for people talking to each other, having a safe spot to communicate, that sort of thing. Immediately after the fires, we held an initial community meeting at one of our residents' properties. We had a pizzas and talking event at the pizza shop in at Milton, and they were really opportunities for people to vent and ask questions. And it helped to resolve a few of the things that people were angry about so immediate after the fire, and that's a very natural reaction for people to be angry. We created a bunch of special interest groups. They included things like a book club, a craft group, and a yoga group, where people were able to get together in a safe place, help build connection and help build resilience. Those things obviously weren't for everybody, but they did help people to connect to people in a safe environment. We specifically, that's my wife and I, got a request to run some fire preparedness workshops, which we initially did under RFS auspices. That photo that's up there is a drone photo taken of our property about a week after the fire. We were there on the day. I don't think we would have saved the property had we not been there on the day, but having the right equipment and the right training enabled us to protect the property safely. And there was a real need for expressed from members of the community to tap into that experience. So we demonstrated what we did on site. We showed people equipment. We even talked about the sorts of non-bushfire dangers that could happen and how you deal with them. So, for example, you need to have a fire blanket in your kitchen because a fire brigade may take 20 minutes or half an hour to turn up, and by that time your house might have burnt down. So we demonstrated how to use a fire blanket, how to use a fire extinguisher, that sort of stuff. We've since run those workshops, not under RFS auspices, but we call it a case study now in a number of other communities, and we're prepared to do that for other communities in the future. We then went into COVID challenges, and I can't underestimate how much impact COVID had. It kind of stopped all of the communication between people. I think that had a really bad effect on people's ability to heal. It was what it was. It's part of resilience we have to get through. We started engaging with NGOs, so in particular Vinnie's and Red Cross really helped. And by the end of December, 5th of December, we had what we called a We Made It Day, which the whole community got together, had a big barbecue, we had some live music being played, all this sort of thing. We went, hey, we have made it. We've got through not only the fires, but we've got through COVID and we've come out the back end. And that need to celebrate and come together as a community, I think, was a very important thing. We then started to consider community-led resilience. This model that we've got up there is actually a Red Cross model. It's very simple. It says to create a community-led resilience team, you need a group of enthusiastic people in the middle that are part of the community, because by definition community-led means you need a leader from the community. Then you have street coordinators with houses coming off it. Now in our case we call them hubs. Once you get that structure in place, then you can deal with stakeholders like government agencies, Red Cross, SES, Fire and Rescue and the like. We had a community meeting in Milton RFS station in July 2022. It was inspired by Vinnie's, Red Cross, and in particular by the case study of the Upper Kangaroo River Progress Association, who are already well on the way of this journey. We advertised it on the WhatsApp group, and we got about 55 attendees, which we thought was pretty good, given that there are about 90 odd properties in our community. We discussed various case studies that we knew of, and in particular, we discussed the fact that we always need to be ready for fire. This graphic up here, I'm not going into it into a great deal of detail, but it's a model produced by the University of Wollongong based on a study on Kangaroo Valley's efforts. It talks about a cycle, a disaster cycle, where in the non-disaster times you focus on mitigation, which in a bushfire context might be retrofitting homes, upgrading firefighting equipment and the like. In a preparation phase, that would be before the bushfire danger period each year, making sure that your home is prepared for fire, clearing leaf litter, doing all of those sorts of things. In the bushfire danger period, being ready to respond, and then after a bushfire, being able to come together as a community to recover. That cycle is written on this slide as a disaster cycle, but it can also be an annual cycle, because if you think about the seasons of the year, these are the sorts of things that we should be considering at different types of the year, so that we are always ready for when a disaster strikes. We then asked our community a bunch of questions. I'm not going to go through these points one by one, but we just threw this up on the screen and asked for discussion amongst the 55 attendees. And we got lots of very positive comments. But the one I'm going to talk about is one of our residents, or landowners, who stood up, and I think his exact words were, "I'm the most cynical bastard in the world, but if we don't do this, we're bloody crazy." And that really resonated. It got everyone to go, yep, let's stop discussing this. Let's go and actually do something. So we then had our first breakout session, where we got everyone to break up into logical groups about where they lived along Little Forest Road, and we got them to think about which properties could logically form neighbourhoods, what are neighbourhood assets, what priority are they for protection, what is important, do we know the risks, what are the risks, what learnings have you had from past experiences, and people did have great learnings from the Currawong fire, where the fire went and where the fire didn't go, and we could have discussions about wildfire behaviour and why it happened that way. What plans do people already have in place? And could we identify potential neighbourhood coordinators? We took all of that output away, and the first thing we did was broke the community up into 7 hubs. They were logical groupings. It's probably a bit difficult to see on this, but the blue lines on the map are the hubs. So to the right-hand side there, we have lowlands. Lowlands, as you'd expect, is a lowland area. It's mainly farming land, but it logically forms its own hub because it's on town water. The group hubs to the left-hand side of that picture, to the west, they're on much higher elevation. They have a different fire risk profile. They definitely have no water available. So they have a different type of approach that's required, that's in there. So where are we up to? Our progress to date is we've defined our hub boundaries. We drew up a constitution to set ourselves up as an unincorporated association. We had to put a bit of thought into this as to whether we wanted to be incorporated or unincorporated. We decided to start with to go unincorporated, not have a bank account, not have to enter into contracts and that sort of thing. We did find other community organisations that would help us if we did need to apply for grants and things like that. We appointed hub coordinators, established contact and mailing lists. We went out and asked our people in the community, did they or did they not have fire plans? And the main reason we asked that question is to see whether people had made the decision as to whether they would stay or go in an emergency. And that our biggest issue, the biggest problem there is someone who doesn't know. If you don't know whether you're going to stay and you don't know whether you're going to go, then you're probably putting your life at risk. If you know you're going to go, then get out early. If you know you're going to stay, then make sure you have the right equipment and you're properly prepared to be able to fight whatever may come your way. Also, finally, we have already identified who has uninterruptible power to their place, so that might be solar and battery, and or who has satellite communications. So Peter was talking about power going out almost instantly, communications going out. By identifying the properties that have those uninterruptible facilities, they can be refuges, if you like, places where people can go in an emergency and they'll still get power to phone up them, to charge their mobile phones, they'll be able to communicate with family, that sort of thing, even if they're not able to get out of the community. Our work in progress, what we've got going on at the moment, this is the last slide by the way, is we're distributing these Vinnie's Go and Grab and Go bags, these blue ones, thanks to Al and Vinnie's for providing them. We've got a whole lot of inserts in there that will be of assistance to our residents. We're sharing best practice fire plans, so we called for best practice fire plans from the community, and we're sharing those. We will create hub and community level fire plans. We're identifying at-risk persons, so people who might need assistance in an emergency because of illness or age or anything else. We're doing community level mapping. That's to identify on maps that where people have agreed, we'll share them with the RFS so that they have better information when they come to our area for an incident. But they'll identify things like locations of assets, locations of hazards, locations of static water sources. But the amazing thing is we're also finding out a lot of secret information that is inside people's heads. And probably the biggest one that we found is the number of tracks that exist from the back of someone's property, go down the back of Joe's property, go through that gate at the back, go through that property up there, and you'll get onto the next road. So actually, by understanding and knowing where that sort of information, getting it out of someone's head, putting it onto a piece of paper, not sharing it with the world so it goes on Google Maps, but making it available to the people who need to know that information, all of a sudden Little Forest Road is not quite as much a one road in, one road out community anymore. We're putting in a buying service to obtain discounts on fire equipment, firefighting equipment. We've put in a grant application to put in community automatic external defibrillators. We see it as a need, and we're identifying locations for a community fire water tank. That has actually been more problematic than expected, I'd have to say that. Trying to get permission to put that on public land, even though you think that would be a great asset, is actually rather difficult to get someone to agree to that. So there are challenges to going and doing it. In a nutshell, that's the Little Forest story with where we're up to.
Thank you, Ian. So if people have questions for Ian, say those up the end, maybe make a note of them now. Next up we have a presentation from Sandra Arnold. Sandra is from the Sussex Inlet Chamber of Commerce. Sussex Inlet is very prone to flooding and it only has one access road linking it to the Princes Highway. In 2015, the community collaborated with Shoalhaven Council and Griffith University to prepare a community strategic plan. This plan identified disaster management as a key priority for this community. And from this, the local Chamber of Commerce formed a working group to prepare a resilience plan for the community. Sandra, thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn. And thank you for inviting us here from Little Sussex Inlet to share our journey and our story. Obviously, Sandra Gray was to be here today, and of course she's from the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Chamber, I'm sorry, and they've largely been the driving force behind this. So consider me just the substitute Sandra for today. So I'll do my best to fill in. A little on myself, been in Sussex Inlet nearly 5 years now. Wonderful timing, we moved there in 2019 to retire from Wollongong. Yes, very good. How my involvement is because I'm a Red Cross volunteer with the Emergency Services team in Sussex Inlet, so that's how I became involved in our planning. Look, I just wanted to say this is our journey so far. Please take from it what you will and disregard anything that you don't think will work for your communities, and I'm sure we'll be able to learn from the other communities here today. Not sure how to work this thing, but let's give it a go. Did it change? Oh, it changed. Excellent. I'm not very good with IT. I don't want to read you our slides either, I just want to talk to you a little bit about them, but Sussex Inlet back in 2016 worked with the University from Griffith and developed a wonderful award-winning plan for emergencies in Sussex Inlet, and it was, held up as a great example for its time in what communities could do, and then it was put lovely on a shelf and nothing happened. And when 2019 occurred, of course, nothing happened because it was on a shelf and no one really knew, and it was such a shame because so much work had gone into it. But by the time we get to 2019, as you heard from Stephen, and I'm sure we'll hear from others, we are not the only one road in and one road out community. We're just one of many. And we found ourselves largely cut off from the world for about 5 days. Not unexpectedly, of course, it was in the middle of Black Summer and the fires were raging down the coast of New South Wales, and we were just one little group impacted. Look, what we learned over those 5 days, because it was just long enough for everything really to start to fall apart. When you have no Wi-Fi, you have no access to cash, your food supplies can't be replenished, our doctors couldn't get into town, even the police had to bring in our chemists just for medications. So 5 days was just long enough for us to know we'd be in trouble if we really needed to be self-sufficient for very long. So that was a really good catalyst for us to look again and think, oh, we had a report. Let's bring that out and see if we can improve it. Anyway, we've virtually decided to update and start again. So we started off by a meeting in August 2020, I think it was. Our experience previous summer was still very fresh in everybody's mind. And for a small town of about 4,000 people, over 200 people jammed packed into this hall in the middle of a COVID epidemic. So while we were very conscious of, it wasn't a lockdown, can I say, it wasn't a lockdown period, but we were still in the middle of these things and trying to spread these people out. Anyway, but we had wonderful support by our emergency services, our local council, disaster welfare, a number of other groups. Look, I think virtually every organisation, service provider and NGO, plus the public were there on that night because everybody could see that we needed to do something. So, fortunately, the Bendigo Bank was the first people to come on board with a little bit of cash to help us with that. And, you know, we listened to what had happened, people's experiences, what they felt they needed, where we needed to go to from here. And we looked at how we would fund that and how we would move forward. So, obviously COVID came along and really put a dampener on our very exciting meeting and our plans that we wanted to make. But it didn't stop us, and it certainly didn't dampen the community's commitment to follow this through. It just delayed us. So we obviously decided that we would further develop this plan, our Resilience Action Plan, and we started with working groups. What we realised was that smaller working groups sometimes allowed us to focus on particular issues without having to get the consensus of 200 people in the room, but, you know, a smaller number of people with some sort of knowledge or expertise. We also partnered with Shoalhaven Council right from the beginning, and they provided us with a lot of advice, a lot of help, and a lot of expertise. In fact, one of our very first projects, because as many of you would know, Sussex Inlet is very much a holiday destination, and one of the very first things they helped us to do was to provide information in a leaflet form for visitors to our community as what they should do if they were caught in an emergency, so they weren't just relying on the real estate or the owner of the property. So we put this plan to place over the 2021. Of course, it's not a set and forget, it's a work in progress. And I believe we have an end date. We'll continue to work on it for as long as needed. As I said, we established some working groups to focus on various aspects, and people put their hands up with knowledge. Before, during and after emergencies is three, you know, obviously identified areas that a lot of organisations work towards or work within. And many of our organisations, such as Red Cross, one I belong to, works across these, but by having these various committees, we could focus on areas of most need. We also set up some working groups, again, to work in smaller groups. So our logistics people, they've managed to get us a very large generator for our town, which has been absolutely amazing, because one thing that we lacked over our 5 days was a generator. We think there was one in town. I'm talking large scale, not your home generator to run your fridge. I'm talking, I think the RSL Club, which is a well-known point to go to for safety in our town, had bought in, prior to the fires, a very large generator to keep them running. So they looked at generators and power boards in our logistics team, and they also managed the really simple things like mattresses and things now are available, or bedding and things should we need it. Our business community has been working very hard on educating our businesses around preparedness and around what to expect and what happens, but also around what they can do to overcome the problems around power Who knew you can't just plug a massive big generator into a PowerPoint? You have to have a special board. And so far we have about 3 or 4 of our businesses who have gone to that expense and put that board into their business. So it would be places like our chemist, the spa, our post office, some really vital services. And we're working on some other ones as well, our service station, for instance, to get fuel going. The third group is our disadvantaged communities, and so of course, if you know Sussex, you'll know, like myself, many people come there to retire. So there's a fairly large, besides the traditional, oops, I better go very quick. So we're looking at the vulnerable groups and communication, of course. So generators, we're working with council and they put an info hub into our Thompson Street Centre. So that's really great. Funding, I'll just forget the notes and go quickly. Funding has been a hit and miss. We applied for the Blur or the Bushfire funding, we were unsuccessful. That funding would have seen us all but self-sufficient in our town. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, but we have had the continued support of other community groups, the Bendigo Bank, the Business Chamber and others, who have allowed us to do some things. Allowed us to put some of those boards in, allowed us to look at generators, access boards, some of the things that I've mentioned there that we've done. And of course our new neighbourhood centre has given us for the first time a point in our business district, in our main street, where the community resilience team can meet, store equipment and disseminate information during emergencies at that time. So the next steps for us are to continue to work on this plan, obviously, but we're trying to support, we had a very fledgling SES group, I think 2 members, who were supported by other SES groups locally in the area. We've now been able to get a container brought to the town with equipment, and that's helped them refocus and start recruitment. So we're building up our SES. We've also been able to do some surveys around disadvantaged groups. Obviously, for privacy reasons, we can't, after an evacuation, take a list of people who needed to be evacuated. It's not deemed appropriate to keep those lists. So what we determined to do was to take a survey, which we disseminated throughout the entire community, but focused particularly on aged communities and disability, service providers in our town, to find out who would like to place themselves on the register of being at risk. So we would know who we should be looking for if they don't show up in an evacuation centre. We wanted people to tell us things like, do they need help to evacuate? Do they have a car? Do they not have a car? Many people in our town have those 5-kilometre licences. They can get to the shops, they can't drive to the highway with those. So we need to know how people who needs help to evacuate. We're going to continue to obviously make a pest of ourselves at the local council around mitigation for, flood. We've had some great success around the flood markers being moved. They used to be way up near the entrance to the heads, and now they're down in our troubled areas in our town, so that's really good. So we'll continue to be a pest, but I'll finish. So Sussex Inlet, really, we're just on a journey. We are trying to do things that will be sustainable and long-term and that will benefit our community. So by involving as many people in our community as possible and bringing them on that journey, we hope that we're successful in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Next up, we have Mike and Kathy Gorman from the Kangaroo Valley Community Bushfire Committee. Mike and Kathy in Kangaroo Valley, very much pioneers in community-led resilience. In 2018, the Kangaroo Valley community got together to prepare a bushfire plan, which involved mapping firefighting assets and creating neighbourhood groups and a communications tree. So Mike and Kathy.
For that introduction, and thank you all for listening to the Kangaroo Valley story so far. beautiful Kangaroo Valley, and there are other members of our community here today who are also members of our Kangaroo Valley Bushfire Committee, which formed in September 2018 after a public meeting, which is photographed there, called by the local RFS and the local policemen in response to people's growing concern about the bushfire risk, which was already in 2018 a major concern for our residents. Our group has been operating since then and is currently in the process of becoming incorporated, and we're changing our name to Resilient KV to reflect a broadening of our interests and concerns to cover other disasters that we may encounter. Okay, in 2018 and 19, before, of course, the Currawong fire hit, we undertook a number of things. We tried to raise awareness of the need to protect critical infrastructure. As you can see there on our list, we have a few major things we were concerned about. And unfortunately, our efforts here were fairly unsuccessful. The agencies that we wanted to communicate with were not particularly responsive. We also spent a lot of time developing a community bushfire plan to address local KUV issues to do with fire. The plan was originally presented as a brief, but at the time, unfortunately, it was rejected by the RFS District Office as unnecessary and unhelpful, and I just don't think at that time community-led resilience was really being recognised as an important thing. The plan was converted into a discussion paper and it met a similar fate, so we didn't really make a lot of progress there. One thing that we did do, however, was to help prepare the local community ahead of possible fire by an initiative called the Bushfire Ready Neighbourhood Groups. That program was initially taken on by a community member called Gary Moore, and there's paper here at the front desk that you might like to take, which outlines in detail the work that Gary did in the Upper River part of Kangaroo Valley, which was to start this neighbourhood group process. The neighbourhood groups use natural boundaries and ideally consist of about 8 to 12 properties or households. Oops, thank you, tech person. They have a coordinator and sometimes a deputy that look after the administrative side of things, maintain a contact list, help with the communications and that sort of thing. People in their neighbourhood meet in a circle. They have equal responsibility. No one's a leader or an expert, or no one's expected to be that. People, neighbours helping neighbours, as has been mentioned before, sharing their knowledge, their skills, maybe their equipment in terms of helping to prepare their properties and that sort of thing. The whole idea is that people work together in their own little neighbourhood areas to plan, prepare and assist each other before and during fires and particularly after fire as well. Groups have determined their own communication tools. Often they have used WhatsApp, but some in areas where they expect to lose telecommunications have looked at other options as well. And particularly they've determined their own parameters around that use of those. So the idea of perhaps having two separate WhatsApp groups, one for more emergencies and others for general chit-chat, things like that have been very much determined by groups and very different from group to group. They've got access to guideline documents which the committee developed along with Gary Moore as part of the pilot program, and these are definitely not prescriptive, but they're trying to let groups know that there's support behind them, there's ideas that other people have worked through, and those documents would be available to others if they were interested in using them. Our groups have continued to meet each year. We have a pre-season WhatsApp coordinators meeting, and they've continued to be well attended. We've got about 40 groups now, and we had about 34 people turn up to the latest one last November, despite the fact that we're using rain. Finally, our groups are evolving, and many of them are really becoming general resilience groups now who have helped and supported each other through flood and pandemic, and really are looking to the future as strong neighbourhood groups.
Yeah, right. This is going to be a little bit difficult without a presentation, but we'll make up for it. Yeah, the Curragh fire came into Kangaroo Valley on Saturday night, the 4th of January, around 7 p.m. At that time, it had already gone into being a fire funerals fire, and it was about to be impacted by a strong southerly change. Approximately 100 properties in the Kangaroo Valley community were directly impacted, with around 160 buildings being destroyed. So given that we had Kangaroo Valley had done a lot of preparation in preparing our community, and we were about to be impacted by as bad a fire as anything seen in New South Wales in the 2019-20 season, how did we go as a community? Firstly, no one was killed, so that was a great result. Secondly, according to our ambulance crews, so our ambulance station is next door to our fire station, no one required medical assistance. Thirdly, as far as I remember and I'm aware, there were actually no triple-O phone calls. So in spite of facing this absolutely massive fire event, as far as I'm aware, we absolutely had no one from the community who rang up for assistance. Fourthly, everyone who stayed independent, it was about 10% of that 100 properties stayed independent. Everyone of those, that 10%, actually were successful. They saved their home. The next thing of interest was that a significant number, in fact, I'll say most of the properties that were well prepared actually survived without anyone to defend those properties. And what was interesting about that was that those people who made an effort to prepare their property were successful. And I was, as a fireman, I was just staggered by how many houses actually survived given the intensity of the fire that we saw. The last thing that the community did, which was extremely successful, was that the neighbourhood groups were asked to collect the names of those people that were preparing to stay and defend, and that information was passed on via our coordinator network to the brigade. And then on the Saturday night, when the strike teams and the RFS and fire and rescue strike teams came in, I had the job of briefing and giving them tasking. I was actually able to tell them the names of those people that had stayed and where they were, and pretty pleased that they're okay. A couple of insights that are often a different direction. One thing that we found in Kangaroo Valley, and we were very lucky early on that when we asked for community involvement, we got a lot of very good women put up their hand to be involved. So something that Kangaroo Valley has done extremely well, which often isn't done in this emergency disaster space, is that we've had really good gender balance, fantastic gender balance, and that meant that the input that we're getting in from women has really changed the nature of the conversation. The conversation I'd been used to in the RFS world was very blokey. It was all about chainsaws and trucks. The conversation now in the community world was entirely different. And that made a huge difference to the success of our community group. The other two important things to say is that conversations need to be real, and that came out of the Victorian Royal Commission report, and I found that to be extremely successful. So no motherhood statements, just stick to real things, and patience is absolutely critical. Don't twist people's arms to be involved, let them to find their time to become involved. And our final slide is, just a message of hope, really, that we've found that it's absolutely possible to prepare a community. And but it has to come from within the community. And just as that house survived without anyone defending, if you make the effort, you'll get the results. That's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike and Kathy. So our next panellist is appearing via Zoom. Are we...
We'll be there. We've just got to get
up
it
and
on.
running?
Hopefully
Okay, while we're waiting, I'll tell you a little bit about the next panellist. It is Mark Koss. He's from the Harrington and Crowdy Head community on the North Coast, New South Wales mid-North Coast. Following the bushfires and floods in 2019 and 2020, they formed a resilience team. This team collaborated with local emergency services to create a website and a booklet for locals and visitors, which gives information on preparing, responding and recovering from natural disasters.
You're looking beautiful today.
Thank you so much.
We can all hear you and we can all see you, so take it away.
Okay, let's see if it works on the down. Okay, so when forming a community-led resilience team, it's really critical to have a stated purpose. Ours actually centres around providing emergency preparedness information, networking links to the emergency agencies, plus educating the community on how to build resilience and identify the available resources needed to support. So why was a community resilience team necessary in Harrington and Crowdy Head? Well, something probably that's familiar with yourselves. Our future modelled extreme weather events and our past experience indicated that the local community could be cut off and isolated for up to 5 days. So the initial responders may rely entirely on people in the local community. So if I can deal with some key messages. If you're starting out to form a community resilience team, there's actually no need to reinvent the wheel. It is far easier to adapt a community emergency guide and action plan to help your community better prepare for, respond to and recover from natural disaster events. There are many tools available that can be accessed from the various websites of the emergency services and aid agencies, and also from your council. The last slide, which we'll get to soon, provides numerous examples of essential links to access these various tools. Now, it's critical to understand the roles of the various government agencies in responding to and managing evacuations in extreme weather events and the post-recovery efforts. Your community resilience team should include representatives from your council, Resilience New South Wales, aid agencies like Australian Red Cross, emergency response agencies such as RFS, New South Wales SES, the police, your community organisation and neighbourhood groups, and experienced volunteers from your local community that are team players. Very important, team players. It's probably a great thing not to underestimate the level of administration required for governance of your entity and coordinating, training, updating and communicating. The amount of funding from grants and fundraising events are also critical, as those funds will be needed to cover both the administration and running costs of your entity and also the publications, flyers and other things that you distribute within your own community. So this is the Harrington Crowdy Head Emergency Guide. So this published booklet was actually distributed to every household in the local community, to every business, and it has been given to both new residents joining our community as well as visitors in the local community. This publication actually won the top New South Wales Resilience Award and shared this award in the recent awards. So in terms of the contents of the Emergency Resilience Guide, I appreciate the slides probably looking too busy because it's a very busy slide, but basically the key thing about the fundamentals here is that the contents really need to demonstrate the fundamentals of resilience and the key information on your model weather events and also community information. What I suggest you do, of course, is I'm happy to share this publication with you, and obviously it's probably good if you just simply adapt it in much the same format and much the same content heading. This is the example of some of what I would call the essential web links to the various tools that are available from both the emergency services, aid agencies, the GABC, and of course council and other organisations such as Collaborating for Inclusion. This one here obviously caters for people with disabilities as well, so things like that are pretty important. And I think my 10 minutes is probably gone. So I hope those simple messages have reached you and they are helpful.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was fantastic. Okay, so we're going to have a slight change in plan. Instead of going to our pre-prepared questions, we're going to open it straight up to the floor because we are running a little short of time. I'm sure there's heaps of people who have questions based on these fantastic presentations we've had. So if you have a question, a general question or a specific question for anyone on the panel, please raise your hand. We have a roving microphone.
All these plans are very, especially the one in Little Forest Road and Kangaroo Valley, and Sussex Inlet one, and I guess the one up there too, are incredibly dependent on very enthusiastic, skilled people to run and to come forward and to work like slaves to get this all done. How do you find these people? I know that's probably can't be answered.
In our community, I think they naturally floated to the top of the milk like the cream does. People did want to contribute to the community after the fires. I think that's the very first step, is identifying those people who are willing to give it a go. It's interesting that lots of people do want help once you start getting the message out. So, whilst we haven't got every single role filled that we need to, we haven't overcooked the whole thing either. So, I mentioned that we haven't gone to incorporate ourselves or all of those sorts of things up front. So we've tried to keep it as simple as we possibly can, and that reduces the effort.
Yeah, the other comment I'd make is that I think if we tried to do some of this stuff 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been successful, but there's been a shift in the community and around the world, really. There is a much stronger understanding of climate change, and people realise that they have to do something. And I think that's making some of this stuff possible today that we wouldn't have been able to achieve some time ago.
Just that in our community there's nothing like, a close call to bring it as a priority to people, but also the realisation, as everyone has mentioned around climate change, that these disasters are ongoing, they are more impactful, and therefore if you want to stay in your community, we need to be proactive, or we won't be able to live there.
One of the things that the emergency leaders of climate action is now starting to focus on is the need to ensure that all this brilliant work, and this is fantastic what you've been describing, continues on. People will shift, people will die, people will be replaced, and it tends to wax and wane. Just like you said with Darryl O'Choy's work up at Sussex Inlet. We are starting to advocate now for money to come from the $200 million Disaster Relief Fund annually to provide for community connections officers, paid people. We're not quite sure whether we should be advocating that they be part of local government or state government, but they should actually live within communities and actually be responsible for forming these connections and maintaining these connections. Because we believe there are so many demands on people now to volunteer their time in all sorts of areas to add to what is just a very busy life anyway, that we need an extra spoke in the wheel, and it's a paid person, and that should come out of that emergency fund.
Was there somebody over?
Thanks, Peter. We'll take that as a comment. I think there was another question over there. Ian, did you have your...
My point is not so much a question, but still a point. So there is very good community efforts now happening, as we've just been told about, and that's brilliant. It's great to hear that. There are agencies clearly that have had to think about things in an important way since, particularly in this area, because we didn't get the floods that happened further north, and inland, but we certainly had a bad fire situation. So different agencies obviously got to rethink perhaps what was done at the time and what might need to be done or should be done in future to try to make a better response. So my question is, at the heart of that, you've got communities having to do or doing what we're saying is important for resilience and to be prepared, but agencies also having to be more resilient and better prepared. But at the heart of that, and especially in an operational situation where you're faced with a crisis, who is it that's at the heart of that? What is it, an agency? Is it a group of agencies that pool their resources to make sure that there's proper interoperability, so responding in an agile way and not just saying, well, we've gone down the track of planning to do this, so we're going to go ahead and do it, even though conditions have changed? That's the heart of my question, I suppose. So the question is there some planning going on to make sure that the coordination, the interoperability, command and control in a bad situation is going to be handled more skillfully with the best practices from the past that have been rethought and thinking about actually what's now happening in a way that's going to get better responses on the ground at the time?
Good question, Ian. I think that might also be quite relevant to, I think, the next panel where some of the agencies are on. But from a community-led perspective, perhaps Mike and Kathy, because you had your community group up and running in the middle of before the crisis, but you were running during the fire. How was the community group able to operate and be reactive and change according to circumstances during the actual crisis?
We were literally using the technology like WhatsApp to get an update. If people changed their mind, if people said, say, on the 3rd of January that they would stay and defend, but by the Saturday they had changed their mind, and that information was being fed back by their coordinator through to the RFS, so that we were getting an update picture on who was actually staying and defending. But we weren't attempting in any ways to respond. We're not trying to duplicate what the RFS was doing. We were just collecting intelligence and helping people to be better prepared. So I don't really personally see a conflict down at the community level. I think it can work fairly seamlessly. But yeah, I certainly agree with you that we all need to become much more flexible in our approach to these things. But I think as we demonstrated in Kangaroo Valley, we are all quite capable of being faced with an incredible disaster, but not facing an absolute, what's the word for it, chaos, that's it. So I'd describe Kangaroo Valley's response as organised and tough and difficult and a lot of trauma, but there was very little anger in Kangaroo Valley because people had thought about and made decisions beforehand, and therefore there was nothing to be angry about. So even though you might be sad that you lost your house, you're not angry that you've lost your house. And there's a really important difference in that. So in our community, we experience very little anger. And while there's sadness about loss, if you don't have anger, then the recovery process is entirely different.
Do we need to wind up now? Okay. thank you to all our panellists. And yeah, please everyone, reach out in the break time because I think there's plenty more to talk about. Thanks, Alistair.
Yeah, thank you very much everyone for coming today and speaking to us, particularly to you guys at Travel Fire and Ian and Mark up there in Zoom land. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you giving up the time. So what we'll do is we'll have a 15-minute break now. Just these guys are here for the rest of the day, so please make their presence useful to you if you want to talk to them. Have a break for 15 minutes and then we'll come back with the second panel.